members. We appreciate their support and participation in NGV America and all they do for this market. So next slide, please. So the Federal Transit Administration currently has a solicitation out. This is funding for transit buses. And this program, the Low No Emission Bus Program, go to the next slide, please. This program was part of the FAST Act. It's increasingly becoming more and more important. Congress authorized this at $55 million a year, but as our Congress has been feeling generous the last several years when it comes to budgetary issues, they've increased that funding level. And for this current solicitation for FY 2021, they've allocated $180 million. So this is a program that provides funding for state and local governments to purchase zero emission or low emission transit buses. But it also provides funding for things like construction of refueling and maintenance facilities. So it's not just limited to buses, but buses are a key component of the program and really essential to showing benefit. This is a competitive program. It's a discretionary, the awards are made discretionary on a competitive basis. So that's important to point out. So people have to put together a really good project proposal if they want to get funding. There's some other things that are funded as well. A very small amount of the requested money can go toward training. So I wanted to highlight that too. Next slide, please. NGV America worked with our partners in Congress and supporters in Congress and were able to get some language in the FY appropriations bill last year that directs the FTA to implement this program to encourage a variety of different fuel types. The importance of that language is that if you look at past years, all the money is going to electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. And yet this is a program that is not limited to zero emission. It does include low emission. So, excuse me. So it's important that we got this directive, and we think that's going to be helpful in this latest go around of funding. Next slide, please. The opportunity was released on February 11th, and FTA held a webinar on March 4th. Project submissions need to be in by April 12th, but you probably want to get your submission in 72 hours in advance. Everything has to be done electronically, and if there are any glitches or follow-up questions about the data that was submitted, you want to make sure that you allow for that. So they recommend 72 hours. And they have a great website with a lot of information on how to get registered and how to submit your funding proposal. So next slide, please. We've highlighted that here on that slide, but next slide, please. Eligible applicants, think about go back to the slide, previous slide, please. So the eligible applicants are local governments, state and local governments, also state Department of Transportation and Indian tribes. As I said, the applications must be submitted electronically. And the key is really, you have to be a government entity, and these have to be transit buses. They can't be party buses or school buses or for hire shuttle buses and that type of activity. They have to be transit buses operating in a transit system. So we're ready to go to the next slide, please. So if you look at the guidance, it's really well written. It's only about 7 pages long, the notice they put out. But we wanted to call attention to what we think are some of the important things in the notice, and just to give you a little more information. I do suggest that people read it. It's only 7 pages long, but here are the highlights. So bus replacements of existing service buses qualify, as do new buses. Some programs will only fund bus replacements, but this program will fund both. If you're taking old buses out of service, or if you're building a new line, a new service line, or adding to your bus fleet, you can do that with this program. And scrappage is not required. You don't have to take that old bus out of service and destroy it. It can be put into your spare fleet. Replaced buses have to have satisfied the FTA minimum useful life, however, though, which is usually 12 years. Cannot use funds to reimburse expenses incurred prior to being awarded the funds. That's just standard government contracting. So you need to be careful about that. If you've already started on a project, you can't request money for things that you've already committed to and spent money on. Funding is typically 85% for the buses and 90% for the fueling infrastructure if you're in a Clean Air Act non-attainment area. Otherwise, it's 80%. The federal share is 80%. The local share would be the remainder, 20% or 15%. And if you're asking for money for natural gas buses or electric buses, you have to demonstrate how this is part of your long-term integrated fleet management plan. So I don't think they want people buying two, excuse me, hydrogen fuel cell buses just to play with the idea of using them. They want this to be a well thought out part of an overall plan. Let's see, we already talked about matching funds, minimum funds or maximum funds. How much should you ask for in your solicitation? There are no guidelines there's no minimum or maximum requirement, but for guidance purposes, the most they've ever provided for a single award is 7 million. And typical awards are on average about 2 million. So that's probably something to guide you with, to guide your thinking process. You can combine these funds with other federal funds. That's allowed. You still have to meet your matching obligations, but you can combine funding. You have 3 years to spend the funding. If awarded, 3 years from the time awarded to spend this money. Capital acquisitions of buses must be competitively awarded unless a manufacturer is part of your application. And if I didn't already say it, buses, these have to be already FTA approved buses. You can't go with a prototype project. Next slide, please. I'm gonna get some water here. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so I'm gonna grab some water. This slide is our recommendations, what we think will help improve the prospects for your submission. Obviously, you've got to have a strong partner in a transit agency or state DOT. If you're targeting your buses toward non-attainment areas, that's going to increase the amount of funding you can get and also going to probably increase your chances of getting funding. And also, if you show that you're using the buses in a environmental justice community or an area that suffers from significant pollution, that's going to help. When you're replacing buses, the older the buses and the higher mileage buses, you know, the more miles they accumulate each year, the better your project's going to look. PM emissions, keep in mind that when you're quantifying the benefit, it's your new bus versus the old buses that you're taking out of service, if you're taking buses out of service. And same thing with carbon emissions. One problem we've had with this program is that for carbon emissions, it's focused on tailpipes. Obviously, that gives electric vehicles an advantage. We are asking for and seeking clarification that RNG projects be allowed to take credit for their upstream emissions or well-to-wheel emissions. That's not specifically called out in the program. And we think certainly FTA should have discretion to do that. And we're urging them to do that. Also, another thing to do is if your project fits well with certain regional goals, like you've got local energy production or from a landfill or wastewater treatment facility, if you're doing RNG, it helped to show how this is part of a broader community plan to address pollution and drive economic development. In terms of RNG, we already touched on that. We think that will help your project, but the program is not limited to RNG. CNG vehicles with the low NOx engines should qualify. We just think it's going to be more difficult for them to be chosen. So RNG, we're pushing people in the direction of RNG. Next slide, please. And we can take questions at the end or whenever you want, but I'm going to pivot now and talk a little bit about RNG credits.
Yeah, okay, I've got just a question here.
Sure.
person, they're just asking if the slides are advancing. I would say yes, they are advancing. Hopefully you are all able. Okay.
We're on the slide that says RNG credits also could be important incentive for NGV users.
Right.
Hopefully everybody's seen that. Next slide, please. What we're going to do here is just kind of give a basic primer and then kind of explore what the potential economic value of credits could be. So hopefully this isn't too basic for people, but and hopefully I don't start having a coughing fit. The regulatory programs such as, the low carbon fuel standard and the renewable fuel standard allow the producers of renewable natural gas to earn and sell credits associated with the benefits of that renewable natural gas. Typically, or I think generally, you have to be registered with the regulatory agencies. You have to use a pre-approved or approved pathway. That means you have to use what they've approved already, or show what your carbon reductions are from your program, and you have to demonstrate delivery to the transportation market. So the producers of the credits generate these credits, and they often sell the credits unless they're working with a third-party broker or someone else. But I think the point we wanted to make for today's presentation is that the users and the retailers of the fuel, the fleets and the fueling station, they have a lot of leverage in negotiating for a portion of the economic value of the credits. And that's because, as we said, you have to demonstrate delivery to the transportation market. So there is some leverage downstream for folks to say, we're willing to partner with you and use this fuel or sell this fuel, but we would like to benefit as well. So there's some give and take there in the marketplace, and that's for parties to negotiate. And also it's important to point out that the credit value is not just determined by what you can sell it for, but you have to take into account that there are significant costs with producing renewable natural gas. So the producers need to be compensated for that as well. The next slide, please. This, I thought this was helpful to show. The screenshot on the left, unfortunately, it's a little faded, but this is from yesterday. I pulled this from the Renewable Fuel Standard website. EPA shows what D3, D4, and D5, and D6 RINs are going for. And if you see the blue line, those are the D3 RINs. Those are what we are focused on mostly for RNG. And it is a little light, but you can see that the credit values are trading in the $1.50 and north of the $1.50 range. I'm almost positive these are for ethanol gallon equivalents, not for gasoline gallon equivalents or diesel gallon equivalents. So in the next slide, we'll adjust for that a little bit. And then to the right is the low carbon fuel standard. Those credits are not in terms of gallons, but are in terms of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent offset. So one's in metric tons, and those prices are roughly about almost $200 now a metric ton. So $1.50 ethanol gallon equivalent for the RFS program, and about $200 a metric ton in the LCFS program. Next slide, please.
Jeff, question is, how much does $200 a ton equate to for a gasoline or diesel gallon equivalent?
Oh, that's a great question. That's what the next slide attempts to do. So let's walk through that. So I've tried to show a couple different ways to look at this in terms of whether we're dealing with landfill gas, dairy gas, or just the average bio-CNG that's being sold in California today. And so, California, the carbon intensity figures in these programs are grams per megajoule. So your CI score is grams per megajoule. So what we do is we convert grams of megajoule to grams per diesel gallon equivalent. California says there's 134 megajoules per diesel gallon equivalent. So that's what I'm using in this spreadsheet. So when we do these conversions, that 100 and I used $195 for metric ton. When you convert that to a DGE value, landfill gas is worth about $1.65 a diesel gallon equivalent. Dairy gas is worth, this is the maximum amount you could get for a credit. Remember I said there are costs associated with producing the gas, and there's the producer who's involved in it, there's the retailer, and there's the user. But if we're just looking at the value of the credit that's sold to an obligated, generated from selling credits to an obligated party, dairy gas could be $10.23 a diesel gallon equivalent. If we use that, and that's because dairy gas has a carbon intensity of, we used 283. There are some pathways that have been rated much higher than minus 283, or much better than minus 283. If we use the current average in California, which is minus or negative 17.95, that equates to a diesel gallon equivalent of $3.19. And then we similarly converted the RFS credits, which I said were going for roughly $1.50 or north of $1.50 in ethanol gallon equivalent. And so the RFS program does not reward different types of cellulosic fuels depending on their carbon score. They treat them all the same. So they get $1.50 credit, and then when you convert that to DGE, that comes out to $2.70. And that's simply because the credits are in terms of ethanol gallons, which have about 77,000 BTUs. Diesel has, on a higher heating value, diesel has 138 plus thousand BTUs. So when you do the math there, it's pretty straightforward, but it comes out to $2.70 a DG. That's pretty significant. And in terms of MMBTU, the dairy gas is $73 an MMBTU under the LCFS program, and $19.48 an MMBTU under the RFS program. So these are significant dollars. And this just give you an idea of the type of money that's out there. Again, there are project costs or transaction costs, regulatory fees that people have to pay. All that has to shake out in the end, and then it's up to the different players to negotiate a piece of this. But it's really amazing what the value proposition is here. And so I think that's the last slide I have. Yep. So at that point, if there are more questions for me, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll pivot and transition to Allison.
Okay, I don't see any other questions for Jeff, but if any of you on the webinar do have questions for Jeff and they come to you later, please feel free to use the chat function to type them in. And I will stop sharing for just a moment. And Allison, you can go ahead and take us away. I'll probably put up another slide here in just a minute, but go ahead and take us away for now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Thank you, Dan. Thank you to Alex for reaching out. There's really a lot going on in the federal space so far this year. I should start with an introduction. I'm Allison Cunningham, Director of Federal Government Affairs for NGV America. I am fortunate enough to get to work very closely with Jeff, who handles a lot of our regulatory affairs. And then I handle our federal legislative affairs, including everything on Capitol Hill. So as I mentioned, there's really a lot that's going on this year in clean transportation, clean tax, surface transportation, and kind of all of the above. So I'll just kind of give a high-level overview of where I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities for fleets and for others that want to make clean transportation and natural gas vehicle investments. First of all, the first question I always get is about the alternative fuels tax credit. So that's a 50-cent per gallon credit for sale on the use of natural gas in transportation specifically. At the end of last year, we received a one-year extension, so that will now expire at the end of 2021. We are currently working to ensure that it is extended on a longer-term prospective basis. Our desire is to see that extended for a full 5 years. It was included in legislation called the Green Act, which was introduced by House Ways and Means Democrats. That really is their kind of opening salvo, their idea of what they would like to see for clean transportation and clean tax that's going to happen this year. That included, as I mentioned, an extension and a phase down of the alternative fuels tax credit. It would extend the credit a full 50 cents for 2022, but would phase it down at varying increments, 38 cents, 25 cents, 17 cents for years 2023 through 2025, and it would expire January 1st, 2026. So that's, again, where NGV America, we really feel like we need at minimum a 5-year extension of this credit. So we'll be working with Democrats in both chambers to get that done, to make it clear that our market and our industry really needs this in order to continue to spur investments and to kind of give people a runway we haven't really had since the inception of the credit, to make some of those purchasing decisions and to benefit from the buyback of the fuel credit that goes on there. So this bill, the Green Act, is the Democrats' tax priority. They've made it clear that that's where they stand, at least in the House, on those clean energy tax credits. The good news for those of us who are watching this, usually we see tax get dealt with at the end of the year. Hopefully we'll get to it earlier this year and it won't just be a late December kind of short-term extension. But the good news is that in the recent COVID bill, they included some child tax credits and other kind of personal credits that were also big priorities of Democrats in the House that they had been wanting to get done for several years. So in a lot of ways that really clears the decks, right? They wanted to help those individuals before they did anything that they viewed as helping industries or corporations, whether you agree with that characterization or not. The important thing is getting rid of those other credits in terms of getting them off of their plate, getting them passed into law. That's something that helps us because then they can focus on these clean transportation credits and other clean energy credits. So it still remains unsure about the long-term future of the AFTC. We will certainly be pushing to have that extended as long as we can, but we're also beginning to have conversations around the possibility of proposing a renewable natural gas fuel credit for use on road. So stay tuned, something related to that, as that comes out in the next couple months and weeks. So most of that was focused in the House. We look over to the Senate. Senator Wyden, who's now the chairman of the Finance Committee from Oregon, he has introduced some technology neutral tax legislation that would kind of replace all the various investment tax credits and production tax credits. So I expect that to happen again. It doesn't really seem to deal with anything specific to on-road. So I'll be keeping a close eye on what that looks like, where that might go, ways we can work with the Finance Committee on kind of natural gas specific or alt fuels specific tax legislation as well. Moving on from tax, we will also have another surface transportation reauthorization this year. You may recall that we went through the iterations of getting a long-term surface transportation reauthorization in 2019. What ended up happening was it expired last year in 2020. We had a 1-year extension of existing policy rather than the 5-year extension, 5-year reauthorization that was worked on in 2019. So this year, Congress is really hopeful that they'll get a full 5-year reauthorization bill that will have some different language in it. Last go around, Republicans still controlled the Senate when we did this last time, and Democrats controlled the House. So we saw a House bill that was very much favored toward EVs and hydrogen and kind of zero tailpipe only, whereas the Senate bill had a little more room for natural gas, certainly, other kind of alternative fuels that they were dealing with. This go around, we're doing a lot of meetings with both Democrats and Republicans that sit on key transportation committees in the Senate to ensure that natural gas is a part of these programs moving forward. We're sharing with them our industry's priorities. Hopefully the Senate will stick to its history of having bipartisan surface transportation bills that they work on. But if not, I would expect it to look more like the House bill last go around, where maybe the bill that gets introduced has electric and hydrogen only, and we're going to have to work to get natural gas included as eligible again. Within that bill and surface transportation reauthorization, we can expect to see reauthorization and probably plus-ups, as we call them, or increases in funding amounts for various surface transportation programs, various clean air and clean vehicle programs. It can get a little muddy because there's a lot of different committees that have jurisdiction on some of these. But the biggest thing we're watching in surface transportation is alternative fuel corridors. In 2015, the FAST Act, or the previous Surface Transportation Reauthorization, created the Alternative Fuels Corridors Program. You probably are familiar with the designation for certain fuels in certain areas. You probably have corridors in your state or your area, and those made corridors for natural gas, propane, hydrogen, and electricity. In the most recent attempt at a reauthorization, there was a proposal to build a really robust grant program for the build out of corridors. So that would, give money to local nonprofits and local transit authorities and others to partner with private industry to build out facilities. And again, that kind of got into where Democrats were pushing for EV and hydrogen only, as opposed to kind of all four of those initial FAST Act fuels. So we will be continuing to push to make sure that natural gas is included there. We're also going to be continuing to push on language there so that it benefits different vehicles, different duty weights, different parts of the country, different transportation needs, et cetera. We'll also be keeping an eye on bus grant programs. Jeff talked at length about the Lono program. We're going to continue to work on the reauthorizing side to make sure natural gas stays eligible. But we also want to make sure that natural gas buses have a fair shot in the kind of broader surface transportation block grant programs, the bus and bus facility programs, et cetera. Some of the other programs we're going to be looking at, you're probably familiar with, DERA and CMAQ. We're also going to be keeping an eye on whether or not we can speed along Buy America waivers and encourage the new administration to take a quicker look at those so that it doesn't hinder any CMAQ funding getting out the door and into needed projects. So then, in addition to surface transportation, I told you there was a lot going on this year. Lots of climate legislation coming out of the Hill. The House has the Clean Future Act, which really is looking to kind of decarbonize the economy and kind of decarbonize energy and electricity and everything in between moving forward. So we're keeping an eye on that. I think that we're going to see maybe an energy bill in the Senate as well. They had a transportation hearing this week in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. There was an energy bill that passed the Senate last year, but unfortunately their transportation title was taken out. Either they couldn't get agreement on it or some other kind of procedural hiccup removed that. So I know that Chairman Manchin is keen to get that transportation title passed at some point this year. Good news in both of those kind of clean air and climate bills. Good news, bad news. Bad news is, again, Democrats introducing these, they're likely to include only certain fuels or vehicle types. So it'll be a bit of an uphill battle to make sure it's more bipartisan and kind of all of the above in terms of our renewable transportation future, our clean transportation future. So we'll be working on that. But the good news is we're likely to see increased funding for really important programs like Clean Cities. I certainly think we'll see that in kind of energy and commerce, energy and natural resources, climate focused legislation. Appropriations will also have, for those who follow that, condolences to you. We do that generally get that done at the end of the year as well. So we just got for FY21, we passed that funding in December when we got the tax credits and everything else passed. So NGV America will be pursuing funding, programmatic funding within appropriations for various research and development priorities that we have. But I think that the bigger kind of more important thing for folks on this call to be aware of, similar to kind of what Jeff spoke to about transit and kind of applying for transit grants and being ready for that, earmarks look poised to come back. If you're not aware of earmarks, they are kind of member-directed spending or kind of member-directed priorities within appropriations bills. Having been a staffer on the House at the time when they were kind of phasing those out and seeing the way it kind of changed Congress not having those available, I am very glad to see them come back. They're incredibly helpful tools for leaders of both parties in order to get big, massive, comprehensive bills passed. So that'll tack into infrastructure, and things along those lines. There's also a chance of getting funding for local projects and local priorities. With this coming back, we do expect there to be, a much more rigorous process for these. In the past, private companies could get earmarks. Now they're going to ensure that no private companies can get earmarks, only localities, quasi-governmental agencies or nonprofits. So be working with DOTs and your kind of nonprofit partners to get prepared for that. There will be some limits on the earmarks as well. members are going to have to declare publicly that it's their earmark and that they don't have any financial interest in whatever's happening there. So people who are carrying out these earmarks and doing these requests really need to get in touch with your elected officials, get on their radar, let them know what kind of projects you have. The same goes for surface transportation. The Senate is kind of taking member requests for specific priorities. By tomorrow, this is where transit agencies and others are saying, you know, we need X amount of money to do X, Y, Z. So those are good funding opportunities for fleets within that surface bill, but also be thinking about what you might ask for or ways you might be able to get support from a member with regard to earmarks. They will be limited to the number that they can request. There will be a cap on the amount that they can request, but it's a really good way of obtaining that money that was going to be out there anyway. And in the past, lack of earmarks essentially left that discretion of spending to the White House. So now it kind of brings it back to Congress, and you can localize it a little bit more. And the last thing I'll just mention is we get lots of questions and inquiries about infrastructure. Oftentimes we talk about infrastructure and surface transportation as if they're kind of one and the same or overlapping, and they're kind of really all of the above. I think we'll certainly see, as I mentioned, a surface transportation bill this year. I'm not so sure about a comprehensive infrastructure bill. You know, I think at one point we wondered if there might be a massive infrastructure bill that was tied into COVID relief that had lots of things we saw in the previous stimulus bill in the Obama era of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, where we were talking about shovel-ready jobs and earmarking money for projects, et cetera. I don't think that there's an appetite to do that now, quite like there was in November, say. We had that really expensive COVID relief bill that just passed. It had a lot of money and a lot of funding for a lot of different things. Not everything was specific to COVID, so there was some transit money and other things in there. Nothing specific to natural gas vehicles, but still helping, you know, those entities deal with fallout from COVID. So I just don't think we're going to see another super expensive infrastructure bill. That's just my thought. It might be broken up into kind of several different bills or several different priorities. But with anything, you have a new Congress and a new administration, and basically the first 3 quarters of this year is really crunch time to get those things taken care of before people are looking to the campaign trail, you know, before other factors come into play. So I think this year going to continue to be really busy, going to continue to have a lot of opportunities. So just be ready to pursue those when they present themselves. So with that, Dan, I'm glad to take questions.
Well, not hearing any questions. This is Alex with the Northwest Alliance.
Alex, sorry, this is Dan. I asked the question, but had myself on mute. So apparently I was asking myself the question. So good info. Thanks, Jeff and Allison. Can you please repeat the proposed phase out plan for AFTC? I heard 50 cents for 2022, 38 for 2023, and then missed the rest of it. And Allison has just posted that to the chat. So there you have it. The rest of it was 25 cents in 2024, 17 in 2025, and expires in 2026. So that's in the chat if you want to see it yourself. Thanks, Allison.
Of course, thank you.
So, okay, Alex, you are sharing your screen and you are good to go.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to focus really quickly on state and local incentives in Oregon and Washington that can help facilitate fleets transition from diesel to CNG and even more so to renewable natural gas.
So Alex, I just want to give a time check here. We're 19 minutes out from our hard stop at 1 p.m.
Exactly. So first we've got the Oregon Clean Fuels Program. This is a program that reduces the carbon intensity of Oregon's overall fuel mix over time. It is currently assigns a value of $130 per metric ton of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And this really helps fleets pay off the additional vehicle costs and additional fueling and maintenance infrastructure cost. Because, you know, depending on the CFP price, the Clean Fuels Program credit price, and depending on the extent to which the fleet is sharing in the revenue from the sale of those credits, those credits can be worth sort of as little as 25 to 27 cents per diesel gallon equivalent for a landfill gas derived RNG, to more than $2 per diesel gallon equivalent per DGE for dairy derived RNG. And so you can see where if over the life of a garbage truck or a cement truck or a transit bus, you're burning a lot of gallons. The fuel itself is less expensive. And so the combination of the less expensive fuel as well as the revenue share in the sale of the Clean Fuels Program credits can really help to amortize those additional vehicle and infrastructure costs. Then in Oregon, we've got the VW Settlement Fund. It applies in the Portland metro area in general, specifically in Clackamas, Multnomah, Washington counties. That's roughly half the population of the state of Oregon, or 1.8 million people. This program is being administered through the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. They're finalizing rules around application for and awarding of these funds. They've got $8 million available to distribute for transiting older, dirty diesel, primarily trucks, from diesel to a host of clean alternative fuels, including both CNG and RNG. We expect that we'll know a lot more about the timing for the request for funding applications, how long that application period will be open, as well as when we can expect to hear about funding awards. And we expect that information end of this month, first part of April. It's important to note that the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, working with their stakeholders throughout the rulemaking process, has targeted haulers of aggregate, cement, and concrete. And fleets that do that sort of work will be automatically awarded additional points during the funding application process. So with that in mind, we have certainly targeted a number of aggregate, cement, and concrete haulers for work later this year. And we've got in Washington State, there's a clean alternative fuel tax credit program. It doesn't benefit municipal or government entities, but eligible parties can be any type of a business that are operating commercial vehicles. And these tax credits can be applied against business income tax owed or taxes owed to public utility commissions. And the money can be used to purchase or lease clean alternative fuel vehicles, including vehicles that run on CNG or RNG. Importantly, these tax credits may also be used to build fueling and maintenance infrastructure. You don't see that too often, so that's nice to see. The other thing to note is that these tax credits remain very much unsubscribed. So as of July 31st, 2020, there was something like $29 million worth of unsubscribed tax credits available for use. So I don't think it's going to be challenging. There will be a process to go through, of course, but I don't expect that it will be challenging to apply for and then receive these tax credits.
Alex, can I weigh in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
On that program, we were instrumental in helping get that program across the line a few years ago. It's actually $6 million a year, but it's stacked up. I'd encourage any of you who think you might have opportunities in here to see if you can take advantage of it or find fleets to take advantage of it, because if it's not used, it's going to go away. And it's available today and nobody's finding it. So we want to make sure we drew that to your attention. So Alex, thank you for doing that.
You bet. Happy to do it. And thanks for that point. I'm sorry, I don't know much more about this program. I did contact the Washington Department of Revenue and had a couple of conversations with them. They weren't super eager to help as long as, the conversation was theoretical. But when a friend or a member or a partner of the Northwest Alliance steps forward and actively wants to pursue this program, I'll be happy to put my shoulder to the wheel. And I think, if we have a real opportunity to take advantage of some of these tax credits, I think we can find the right people to give us the correct guidance within Washington State Department of Revenue. And those are the primary programs and incentives that are available throughout Oregon and Washington to incentivize transition of fleets from diesel to CNG or RNG. And to the extent that you'd like to take advantage of any of those programs and you'd like to learn how to do so, my contact information is there, and I'll be happy to take your call or your email. Importantly, guidance from our Northwest Alliance Board of Advisors means that fleets can take advantage of Northwest Alliance services free of charge. So there's no financial barrier. There's no financial barrier to admission. And having said all that, I think we'll allow a few minutes for questions.
Okay, I have no questions in the queue right now. I'll give it just a minute or two for people to type any questions in that you might have. For our presenters, Jeff Clark, Allison Cunningham, and Alex Shea. Good report, comprehensive, and we really appreciate it, folks. While I'm allowing people to type in, I'll just remind you that our April Northwest Gas Association webinar, I think it's April 8th. I think I'm right about that. Will be on the resilience, the value of the natural gas system in terms of energy resilience. And then in May, we will be talking about the EPA greenhouse gas emissions inventory and sinks. And I do have a couple questions here. So from Gordon, can you give some insight on why the zero emission tailpipe argument is so pervasive? I think that might be for Allison or Jeff.
Sure, I'm glad to at least take a first stab at that. I really think that political pressure on Democrats has the issue of a tailpipe and an internal combustion engine as kind of a political purity test. Some of the Democrats I talk to understand that we're not going to have heavy duty electrification in the short term. They have different ideas about when those might be available. And I think that they see the role for a variety of fuels, and they see the goal as decarbonizing rather than electrifying. But I do think that they get an immense amount of pressure from environmental groups and others who say it's electric or nothing, it's zero tailpipe or nothing. And they have struggles there. Senator Merkley, I spoke with his office, and we spoke about the low or no bus program. And they basically said that they told stakeholders in Oregon that they wouldn't support the pursuit of funding for low or no bus program unless it was electric. So that was a little interesting. I've spoken with other offices that see the need for renewable natural gas and other things there. So I definitely think it's those outside public pressures and, kind of lack of education in a lot of ways as well that are causing that.
Sounds like, Allison, you just made a challenge to us here in the Northwest to be talking to our own senator, huh?
Yes. I mean, yeah, it was interesting. I had a conversation with his office, and then I said, oh, I better buckle up. This is the first call I've had with Democrats. It's going to be a long couple of weeks and meetings. But then I spoke with Senator Markey's staff, and he's a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And they said, yeah, we get it. There's carbon everywhere and carbon in everything. Electric buses aren't a silver bullet. We recently had a transit study. And if Jeff and I haven't shared it with you, we're glad to do that. But it kind of looks at the cost of these buses and kind of what they look like in use and things like that. So kind of additional information for folks who are trying to talk to those legislators and letting them know that they want to see RNG or natural gas as part of that future.
I think I'll just encourage everybody on this call. You could make a call especially if you're an Oregon citizen, make a call in. Whether you work for a utility or not, just make a call into Senator Merkley's office and say, hey, as a resident and one of your constituents, I think it's misguided to foreclose on a variety of alternative fuels, all of which contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I would ask you to support the low-no bus program. So There are, a couple dozen people on this call, and I'm guessing many of you are in Oregon, and I would encourage you to make those calls, even if he got 6 or 8 calls on that issue into his office in Oregon. That's probably 6 or 8 more than he's had to date on that particular issue.
Hey, Dan, this is
Jeff, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I just add to this a little bit. I think when this debate started maybe a decade or so ago, the only low carbon fuels that were really being discussed much was ethanol, and ethanol has been extremely controversial. People argue back and forth years and years about whether it benefits the environment, whether it's low carbon or not. And so, I think that's part of the problem, that when this debate started, electric looked like a simple solution. It didn't seem like there were a lot of other solutions, but now we see that we've got other really low carbon negative fuels. And I think the policymakers need to, I should, wake up and be aware of that. I also think there's some backlash against, renewable natural gas has the word natural, natural gas is part of its name, and natural gas is linked to the oil and gas industry, and that means drilling. And yes, it's true, but I don't get why the environmentalists and the policymakers completely ignore the fact that electric vehicles rely on mining of precious metals. And so that's oil and gas is mining and batteries are mining. So there's no solution that just out of thin air presents itself and has no environmental consequences.
Well, that's a topic for another Northwest Gas Association webinar, perhaps down the road. Thanks, Jeff. Any other, just one more, I'll give you one more minute to type in any additional questions you might have. I'll provide you the dates. April 15th is at noon Pacific is the time and date for our natural gas as a resilient energy resource webinar, and May 20th at noon Pacific is for the EPA emissions inventory and sinks. Well, with that, I see no additional questions coming in, so I will extend sincere thanks to Jeff and to Allison, excuse me, and to Alex. That's what it was. It's that mix up there. So Jeff, Allison, thank you so much for joining us. And Alex, thanks for co-hosting this webinar with us. If any of you have any questions on any of this subject, Alex is a great first contact for you. He did put had his contact information up there. If you can't find him, you know how to reach us, so please do so. In the meantime, I will wish you a terrific rest of your Thursday. And once you're through with Friday, a great weekend ahead. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you in April.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.